Hello everyone, this is part 33 of What If Naruto Was in Anbu at 6, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. She wasn't sure what caused his injury, if she had to guess a kunai, or another small knife had been into his shoulder blade, and dragged all the way down, almost to his kidneys. His comrades had managed to grab him, and drag him back as they fell back to the next defensive line. Defensive line. She could almost snort. More like stalling lines. People were still trapped in the streets, civilians, women, children. Either being seized down or taken as prisoners, she didn't know. But she could still hear them screaming in the distance. The smell of smoke and burning wood and plaster faintly reached her nose, and though she wondered just what exactly was going on out there, she dared not look. Night had fallen hours ago, and dawn was now approaching. The fighting had been going on all day, their attacks were never ending, and the defenders were thinning further and further. Exhaustion and weariness beginning to show their effects much earlier than in their considerably more numerically advantaged enemy. They were on their last legs. Only two defensive lines stood now between their enemies and the hospital. And only the hospital stood between them, the cage tower, and the docks. Evacuation procedures were already underway at the hospital, but this was impossible. Especially in the small time frame they had. She could only pray that they could hold out long enough for Zhu Liang and Suna to return. If they returned at all. A naval battle wasn't a ninja's battleground. Had they lost that battle too? The thought caused her stomach to churn with unease. No, that couldn't be. They had to at least have won that. The half-open door to the room was swung wide open, and Anbu, mask half broken, cloak torn and entered the doorway, two others shortly behind him, making Shizune pause in her work as her attention turned to the three. Wah! Shizune-san, the Anbu interrupted as he rushed forward and latched onto the medic's upper arm. We have to get you out of here immediately along with the rest of the medical personnel. We're falling back to the tower. The tower. But the patients, we can't just. We have to. All combat personnel is retreating to the tower, and any civilians we can save are being brought to the docks for evacuation. But the wounded we can't. We have no time. Now what would give you that idea? Shizune's back stiffened, a cold chill creeping up and down her spine as the cold edge of a kunai was held against her teeth, the tiny pinprick feeling more painful than any other sensation she'd ever felt before. The three Anbu recoiled, bringing their weapons to the ready as they glared at the area behind the medic. Shizune's head turned slowly, dreading to lay eyes on the person she knew the voice belonged to. The slowly spinning, three-tomoed Sharingan of the copy ninja met her gaze. The chilling sight of the red eye diminished only by the slumped attitude of nonchalance that hung about him. Kakashi, she whispered. Ah, how nice, Shizune-chan. You remember me. His tone was jovial, his eyes were not. The sound of a bell rang out clear through the air, through the walls of stone and brick. Kakashi's eyes trailed across the room, ears twitching at the sound as he saw Shizune's face light with a spark of hope. The watchtower. He heard her whisper. The copy ninja mused. Only one reason to have hope in a situation like this. Ships. A voice cried from outside. The ships are coming. Help had arrived for them. His eyes turned to Shizune, who brought her eyes to him as he could tell her mind was on the same thought. Either way, it's a bit late for you though. The hanging candles illuminated the deck of the ship with flickering orange, as the moon highlighted silver light over withering shadow. The harsh beat of the waves swayed the mass of wood to and fro. Oi fellas, what you recon these things be? One of the crew members questioned, interrupting whatever conversation three of his fellow pirates may have been indulging themselves in. In the man's hands were several small slips of paper, each with identical symbols. Curious, the other men stepped forward, taking some of the slips in their own hands to examine them. Just look like regular paper to me with some doodles on it. Where'd you find these? One of them said. On the bee of those Dr. Ninja. It was just lying there along with some of their knives and weird medicine. As he answered, one of the men placed the paper on the side of the ship. Oi, this thing sticks. Think it's some kind of special bandage. As the questions and speculations ran rampant amongst the group, one of the men drew the slip of paper closer to his face, while also bringing the candle closer, so as to better illuminate the markings. Wonder what these little, doodle things may. A hand clamped down on the wrist of the hand that held the candle, startling him. But the grip was firm enough to keep the candle almost completely immobile. Turning to face the owner of the intruding appendage, he found Captain Ishio standing there. An irritated expression over his face as he pulled away the candle. Note to self. The pirate captain said to himself as he yanked away the candle. Find a smarter crew. He snatched the paper out of his hand before he lit it aflame and threw the tag overboard. Ignoring the confused looks of his men for a few moments before the tag exploded, showering the upper deck with sea water as the ship lurched to one side due to the blast, the startled cries of the sleeping crew members below deck echoing up above the floorboards. Oh, quit your belly aching and get back to sleep. Ishio yelled, stomping a few times on the deck before turning to the men behind him. Marching up to each of them, he proceeded to take the tags away from them. They're called exploding tags, ya morons. If ya would have bothered to pay attention to the ninja when we were at the docks of Wave rather than drink yourselves sick, you'd know that instead of bumbling around like a couple of buffoons, looking like children who'd just been reprimanded by their parents, the men hung their heads, with one whispering a contrite, "I'm sorry." Ishio rolled his eyes before looking off to the island in the distance. How much longer before those idiots get back with our emergency supplies? The sail to Suna is a long one. And I'd rather make it there without being on the verge of starvation so we can sell that damn white-eyed princess, give back their half-s blonde and get out quickly. Can't stand ninja. Arrogant the lot of 'em. Soon Capien, they left nearly an hour ago so their ship should be coming back soon. Up on the crow's nest none of them noticed their now-s crewmate, or the person standing over him, watching them through dark blue eyes before he slowly faded from view. He needed to find and secure both Hinata and Temari. Then he could K the captain and drag this ship back to the mainland. Good. Just like that. You've almost got the basic movement down packed at this point, was the voice of Kankuro, as the puppet user towered over a kneeling Kiba. The Inuzuka male was currently sitting on the deck of the ship, his face scrunched up in concentration as he focused on moving his newly created prosthetic arm with chakra strings. The arm was more skeletal than anything. With such little time, Kankuro had barely managed to put the frame together with the joints and pivot points functional, let alone any armor platings or armaments like kunai compartments or poison cartridges for claws. It had 4 digits, 3 as fingers and 1 as a thumb. The wood wasn't as sturdy as the material he'd used on his own body armor, but it'd be able to give a few jaw-breaking punches. They both hoped it'd last long enough for them to get back to Suna, where he'd be able to build Kiba some proper equipment. Of course it'd help if Kiba would be able to grasp the concept of chakra strings quick enough to actually use his arm. The Inuzuka was impatient. He supposed he had reason to be. He'd started teaching him just 2 days ago when Zhuge Liang and Gaara had announced that they were returning to Kumo. They were already sailing alongside the coast, and the small gulf that led into Kumo's docks was only minutes away, and Kiba had only just begun to grasp the first tiers of the puppeteering art. His impatience, though understandable, was a pain in the ear right now. He knew enough to get the arm to move, but it was still a conscious effort. It wasn't natural. All right, that's enough of that for now, Kankuro said, waving him off with his normal hand. For the next step. Smoke. Smoke to the north. The cry was up from the crow's nest, and all crew eyes turned sharply towards the northern horizon, where they could see a dark smog rising into the night air, blocking out the still faintly glowing stars. The rising sun had set the sky to a grayish hue, almost fading into blue but not quite. It provided just enough light to see the smoke, but not enough to block out the faintly orange glow that soon greeted their eyes as they leaned over the edge of the ship. Their view of the village was blocked out by the massive rock faces that acted as a natural fortification into the village harbor. It circled around the bay, leaving only a narrow choke point as an opening, excellent for defense, not so much however when allied ships needed to arrive fast. As Kankuro looked over everyone's heads, his attention was diverted behind him by the sound of footsteps, catching sight of Gaara, Yue Ying, and Zhuge Liang as the three marched up behind the men assembled along the edge of the ship, everyone with tension and anxiousness rolling off them in waves, hoping to be able to assess what condition the village was in. And hoping to the gods it wasn't too late. Zhu Liang in particular held his breath with trepidation as the ship picked up speed with a sudden gust of wind. His heart thrumming loudly within his sea as he swallowed thickly, hoping against hope that the defenders had managed to hold off the invaders until now. This hope was shared by many. By all the men and women that had joined him on these ships. But as the ships approached the entry to the bay, the sight that greeted them dashed any aspirations they held of their fellow ninja holding off the Konoha invaders. Flames seared the edges of the buildings, black smoke rising to the air as rubble and debris collapsed, spilling out onto the streets, coated the crumbling walls like badly spilled paint, cascading down the white cobblestone. The main gate of the city, visible from this distance, lay broken, torn into pieces, allowing more of the invaders to pour into the city streets. No. The village. How could this happen? No, no. These were only some of the words that escaped the lips of the Kumo ninja that now watched their village with ever-mounting panic, fear and anger. Emotions ran rampant through the air as even some of the Suna ninja allowed themselves to feel sympathy for their allies. Yue Ying's eyes were wide, brown hair slowly swaying to and fro as she shook her head. This is not possible. Gaara's face twisted with anger as he released a grunt of frustration, fists tightening until his knuckles cracked. Gather your weapons. He suddenly barked, startling those nearest to him before he turned to the helmsman. Get this ship on the dock now. The helmsman nodded, gulping down the lump of fear in his tea as those teal-green eyes fixed themselves upon him. But soon another voice seethed through the air, stopping his movements. Stay those orders. Incredulous, questioning gazes turned themselves onto the lone form of Zhu Liang, face etched into a deep scowl, the lines over his face seemingly carved into his features as his lips curled in distaste as he took a deep breath. Turn the ship around, we're leaving. What? Reikage-sama. No way. He can't be serious. Amongst the outcry, Gaara's voice was strong and clear as he turned to the Reikage. Zhu Liang. The sleeping dragon, posture weary and weighed down, turned his attention to his fellow shadow, already anticipating the question about to spill from his lips. What are you doing? The silence that awaited the Reikage's answer was almost oppressive in itself. I'm giving the order to abandon Kumo. Gaara's response was a mixture of disbelief and anger as he gestured back to the city. There are still people in there. Zhu Liang nodded, annoyance beginning to form over his features as he snapped back. You think I don't know that? Gaara seemed to struggle for words, his voice becoming increasingly heated with every syllable that escaped his lips. You cannot honestly expect us to abandon innocent. Exactly. Civilians. For many, it was the first time Zhu Liang had ever raised his voice, but it didn't hold just anger, no, it was also laced with frustration, disgust and even helplessness. Civilians which we would exhaust whatever little resources we still have available to us trying to save, something that we cannot afford to do. The Konoha forces cannot possibly be expecting us. We can win this, we can drive them back. With what men? Liang yelled, marching right up to Gaara, staring down at the slightly shorter redhead as he spoke. Half of the men we left with are wounded, the other half still exhausted from battle and manning the ships. And not to mention the sizable portion that's now feeding the gulls out in the open ocean. With what force do you hope to win this battle? Certainly not by yourself, because the only man that could possibly drive back an army by himself is the one leading them. Gaara stared into Liang's eyes, unwavering at the man's understandable anger as he spoke. Not this time, he isn't. The dock has yet to be overrun, we can draw a line there and hold back these forces long enough for the civilians and wounded ninja to board the ships. Then we can all retreat safely back to Suna. Liang shook his head, growling with distaste as he began to walk away from Gaara. Such a child. Gaara closed his eyes, taking a moment to calm himself as he took a deep breath before he spoke. Liang, get off this ship. The sleeping dragon paused in his stride, confusion marring his brow before he turned around. What? Get off this ship? Gaara repeated. Because I am going into that village to help those people. With or without you. Liang sighed slowly. Listen, Kazekage, No. Gaara barked, interrupting him mid-sentence. You listen. He straightened, standing to his full height as he repeated the words he'd only said once before. I swear, if by my life or by my death, I can serve my people or those in need of my protection. I will. Liang and those around them listened to those words, immediately knowing their meaning as well as their significance. That is the oath we took. Gaara continued, embers of determination smoldering behind his eyes as he approached Liang. The oath that all cages before us, and after us, have taken and will take. But somewhere along the line you've lost sight of that. I haven't and I don't intend to. So leave if you want. Liang raised his chin an inch or two, eyes meeting Gaara's before the Kazekage looked to the helmsman, speaking in a tone that broke no argument. Bring us into dock. And as if a dam had been broken, a cheer suddenly erupted from the men and women around them. Liang watched the faces of the ninja, now filled with hope, rather than despair. With righteous anger, rather than reckless vengeance. His eyes returned to Gaara's back, as if viewing a new and interesting puzzle. Sabaku no Gaara. Could it really be? Atop the wall Kimimaro stood, skin covered in black markings, bone sword in one hand, bone whip in the other. A squad of ninja behind him as they watched the ships approaching. They are here then, he stated. It doesn't really matter at this point. Came the voice of Hatake Kakashi as the copy ninja emerged from the stone floor of the wall, coming to a stop to Kimimaro's right. The Kaguya gave no reaction to his sudden appearance, merely continued watching the ships. The city has already fallen. The copy ninja continued. If they want to throw away their last bit of energy in a futile attempt to drive us back, well, I'm not going to stop them. Kimimaro seemed to ignore the statement, turning his head to look over his shoulder to the men behind him. Take a unit to the docks, K, all in your path. As the men vanished, Kakashi turned another page in his book, eyes scanning over the parchment. The ships see through the waters of the bay, plowing their way through the currents and tides towards the docks. The heat of the flames that ate away at the city stonework a stark contrast to the cool sea mist of the early morning breeze. At the sight of the ships waving the Kumo banner high in the air, hundreds of people rushed across the docks, injured and soot-covered. This group included children of all ages, some even genin. But Gaara could not fault them for their fear. They were still young, still just children. Regardless of rank, ability or age, they all scrambled across the wooden platforms in a panic, with several people being thrown over the edges of the platform and into the beach. Those that weren't tangled in the seaweed continued the desperate run to escape by swimming for the ships rather than wasting time trying to get back onto the docks. Gaara's eyes took in the chaotic scene, the fear etched onto the faces of the people, as if it had been carved there. The terror that shined in their eyes, and desperation hung over them like a miasma. His gaze snapped over to the gate that served as the choke point from the dock to the city, where now, a swarm of Konoha ninja charged through in place of civilians, see down all stragglers that could not outrun them. It didn't matter if they were women, elderly or even just children. They K them all efficiently. Rage boiled within him, twisting around his heart like a snake, coiling, searing a path, leaving its mark at the brutish actions of these ninja. Jumping over the railing of the ship before a sand platform materialized beneath him, carrying him to the front of the beach, with the men fit enough to fight trailing behind him on the water's relatively shallow surface. The sand platform shifted with a swift jerk of his left hand, the grains cupping themselves in front of him, guarding him against the kunai that were thrown in his direction. With a swipe of his left hand, a sand claw rose from the beach, away the leaf ninja like a giant club, sending them crashing into the stone gate and across the beach. Through the gates, Gaara yelled as the Suna and Kumo ninja caught up before rushing right past him, engaging the leaf ninja at the gate, while others scaled the walls to enter the city. Send these back to their master in pieces. Gaara hissed through his teeth as more sand rose from the beach at his back. The wooden hallway of the ship seemed to groan and creak with every shifting movement of the hull, the candle light only providing the barest minimum of light necessary for humans to see. Naruto skulked through the hallways in silence, avoiding patrols and still awake crew members with ease. He could K them at any given moment. But he did not want another not tonight. The only men that need here were the captain, and any man that was guarding Temari and out off or Hinata, the others he could force to man the ship to take them back to the mainland. Then he could K them all for their utter stupidity in crossing him. Even if they had succeeded, and vanished, once he won the war he would have Hinata's death investigated and would have sent his Anbu to hunt down these men for their transgression. Doors were opened and closed in silence, rooms invaded and vacated without disturbance, their sleeping residents all but unaware of his presence, as they should be. Finally he found one of his targets, within the lower deck of the ship, 2 guards hovering over her bed. Their poise lax and careless, not believing any enemies could reach them, nor that their charge could threaten them in her current state. Foolish. He dropped from the ceiling, landing between them. Barely an intake of breath from the two before one was the other, merely silenced by the inability to breathe or exhale due to the hand over his tea. He squirmed and thrashed, hands clawing at Naruto's wrist in panic. Naruto leaned in close enough so he would hear his voice despite its low volume. Stop moving, the Jinchuriki stated, freezing the man in a second with the sound of his voice alone. I will release you. When I do not attempt to call for help. Should you do, I will kill you before the breath enters your lungs. Do I make myself clear? Face turning red from beat pressure and lack of oxygen from the man nodded quickly, and Naruto released the strength of his grip enough to allow him to breathe, but only just. Now, where is Sabaku? LL lower deck, I think. Main storage hold. We changed it around a bit, took all the junk out. Put a nice cot in there, Suka is in there with her. He's the only one who knows anything about medicine on the ship. Just in case that C on her end starts B again. How did you incapacitate Hinata? Capien, the man paused, swallowing thickly before he tried to take another breath. Capien had a drink with her, some kind of experiment type poison that only affects you ninja types. I don't know anything else about it, I swears. The cogs in Naruto's mind turned slowly, deducing the possible targets such a poison would hit first if it were following the chakra coils of the body. Perhaps the 8 gates were a guidance. He'd have to think on it later. The fact that the poison only targeted ninja severely depleted the chances that the captain would actually be smart enough to keep an antidote. Without another word, Naruto snapped the man's end with a quick crunching sound, feeling the bones shift and grind together beneath his gauntleted fingers before he set him down on the floor. The sound was low, too low to reach past the closed door and wooden walls. But it still caused a stir in the woman within. Naruto's eyes shifted to her, once healthy skin now a sick pallor of pale, hair matted down and slick with a dark sheet over the cot she laid over. Ghostly lavender eyes opened, breath labored as her pupils sought him out in the darkness, body shivering with fever. Finally, she saw him, and when she did she stared with non-recognition for several moments until he knelt at her side. Her eyes closed as a small smile tugged at her lips. You came for me. It was as if every type of relief and graud a human could feel was poured into those 4 words. And no longer was she ill, with fever and possibly She seemed to glow for those few moments before her head slumped against the small mass of cloth that acted as a pillow. Naruto stiffened, leaning a little closer while channeling chakra to his already sensitive ears, listening for a heartbeat. When he heard it, it was still strong. She was only unconscious, her energy sapped from the poison. He reached down, hands reaching behind her knees and cradling her end and upper back before he lifted her off the floor. She groaned at the movement, hands unconsciously reaching for her stomach. The poison was affecting the chakra coils around the stomach, or was it affecting the 5th gate? Damn it! With the Hyuga cradled in his arms, he marched through the groaning wooden halls, his steps just as silent as before as he made his way down the hall towards the lower deck. His nose took in the scents, trying to filter out the heavy stench of alcohol, sweat and the pirate's general body odor, cringing slightly at the foul stench. But soon he found hers, eyes traveling towards a door on the other side of the hall, where the flickering orange of a candle light filtered through the lower cracks of the door. There she is, the red-robed ninja thought to himself before channeling chakra through his ears, listening for any movement in the room. Hearing 2 distinct heartbeats, he pinpointed their positions in the room after a moment of concentration. Assessing her to be the one unconscious, her heartbeat was identified as the slower one. So he naturally zoned in on the faster one. But just to make sure, the cage stepped forward before lightly tapping his foot against the door, just loud enough for the occupants to hear it. Yay! The voice was male, and it was all the confirmation he needed. A wind blade was manifested, the razor edge passing through the door with virtually no sound before it held the man's heart through and through. A thud was heard within the room, and Naruto adjusted Hinata in his arms quickly before opening the door and slipping in. Hinata groaned and hissed at the movement before Naruto readjusted her, finding Temari's equally unconscious body in the room. Naruto put the Hyuga on the floor as gently as possible. HMMR, Temari suddenly groaned, and Naruto's still sensitive ears quickly picked up the sound of her increasing heartbeat. Quickly deducing that she would more than likely not keep her mouth shut, possibly in some panicked, delusion that the pirates would be able to harm him, or distract him long enough for her to harm him, Naruto quickly marched across the room, cold metal gauntlets quickly covering her mouth. The cold metal jostled whatever sleep was in Temari's system right out of her, her eyes shooting wide open before her two hands wrapped around his wrist, clawing at it. Stop moving. Temari froze, eyes adjusting to the darkness as she caught sight of him. He could practically feel the rising panic already swelling up from her body. It did not take a genius to figure out why. If you believe your near-death experience on that ship is my doing, you need only remember that if I really wanted you would be S. She seemed to calm minutely at that, though she was still breathing heavily through her nostrils. Though the statement allowed her to calm down and not make this situation more troublesome than it had to be, it also allowed her to think clearly. And thinking clearly was just as dangerous as panic. Already he could see the cogs turning in her mind as she formed her conclusions. He was keeping her quiet. Now, he'd do that normally, but not in this way. He'd either just tell her to shut up or he'd launch enough K and tempted her to keel over a horse. So since he was silencing her like this, then that meant he wanted to do it without making a scene. And if he didn't want to make a scene, that meant that whoever was on this ship wasn't a friend of his, and if they weren't friends of his, that meant they were probably friends of hers. Noticing the path her thoughts had taken, Naruto spoke. If you are thinking of making a racket so that a would-be rescuer will come to save you, then don't. There's not one person on this ship that can threaten me. The only thing these worthless pirates can threaten is Hinata. As well as yourself if they get truly desperate. He said, gesturing the Hyuga behind him. It was then the Sabaku noticed her. The sickly visage making her eyes widen only slightly. More surprise over her condition than actual presence. Undeterred, the blonde continued. If however you still wish to make an attempt to call for help, know that the only one of these fools with even an iota of intelligence to his name, IK 3 minutes ago. Ishio sighed as he read over some of the maps, plotting the best course to take to arrive at sooner, as well as where they should dock once they arrive. He rolled his eyes before reaching for the alcohol bottle at his side, tilting the opening to his lips. When none of the warm liquid entered his mouth, however, he stared at the bottle with a disappointed growl. Why is the rum always gone? He sighed before standing and making his way to the door. This ship had 3 sake, wine and rum cellars, one of which just so luckily happened to be right outside his room. Clicking the lock to his room open, he opened his door, only for a hand to reach out of the darkness, the metallic claws the side of his N wide open. The pirate captain gasped, choking as his legs carried him back, stumbling over his desk, poring over all the maps in the room, eyes wide and disbelieving. He knocked down several of the candle stands along the side of the room, their lights flickering before regaining their strength while some turned off entirely. He reached the end of the room, eyes wide as his back slid down the wall, hands clutching the side of his open T, staring up at the cage that now stood over his body. Naruto watched as the bee slowly flowed across the floor. It reached his boots, before he heard the thumping of footsteps down the hall, along with the curious shouts of, "Captain," from the men that now came closer. Naruto turned from the S-man, facing the men as they entered the door, freezing at the sight of him and the S-captain slightly behind him. "This ship," Naruto began, "belongs to me now. If you value your lives, you will sail this ship back to the mainland immediately. You will also provide me with the antidote for whatever poison was used on Hinata. If none of you know, then you will show me the poison." Before anyone could respond, a low, grating sound rolled into his ears and Naruto turned, eyes finding Ishio's face. A smile, taunting and smug, tugging at his lips. Then Naruto's eyes found their way to the man's hand, where a single explosive tag, one of the 4 dozen or so he'd taken from his men along the upper deck earlier, lit a flame, about to detonate. The cage vanished in a cloud of smoke before a bright flash of light. The real Naruto's eyes snapped open, acting fast as he stood fully, ignoring Temari's startled gasp. His hand extended towards the far wall, a shock wave of pressurized wind blasting the wooden obstruction wide open. Since they were in the lowest deck, water soon flooded into the compartment. "What the hell are you doing?" Temari yelled as she scrambled to her feet. Naruto didn't allow her to reach her feet on her own, hooking an arm along her waist and lifting her with a single arm as he made another clone to grab Hinata before the water could wet more than her sleeve. Rushing through the hole in the wall, the heat of a deafening explosion nipping at his heels. He marched along the shallow surface of the ocean, stumbling like a drunk as he tried to keep himself standing over the rapidly shifting currents. He spared a moment to look behind him as an explosion tore the ship apart. If everyone wasn't they would probably drown, and if they didn't drown he'd kill them himself once they reached the shore. With no ship they were useless to him. He felt Temari's nails digging into his skin and brought his gaze back to the heavily breathing Sabaku, the sudden adrenaline rush causing brief trembles, along with a slight flush to her cheek. What the hell just happened? She questioned, glaring at him before looking over his shoulder towards the now sinking ship. Naruto ignored her question as he looked to the clone holding Hinata. The clone nodded, indicating she was still alright, for now. Turning his gaze back to Temari he spoke. It appears we will be in each other's presence for quite a while, Miss Sabaku. Before he began to make his way back to the island, Gaara hissed as he willed another wall of sand to rise from the earth, blocking a fire jutsu from striking the civilians that were currently making a mad dash to the docks. They were several yards away, but they weren't the only people he was guarding. It was as if the Kazekage had made it his own personal mission to guard as many civilians as he could. Often even his own defense to their aid. Much to the frustration of his older brother who had taken it as his mission to protect Gaara. They had managed to push into the city streets from the docks, pushing back the enemy enough to link up with the remaining defenders in the tower where they were now proceeding with the evacuation. But now with their forces spread through the city rather than as a single concentrated force, their advance had been ground to a halt and they were now being slowly pushed back. The fire and the determination that had spurred them on at the beginning was now slowly dwindling. Leaving weak, faltering, fearful soldiers in place of men and women driven to save their families. Gaara! Kankuro yelled, launching several shuriken from his wrist launchers as his left arm opened up into a wooden shield, marching up next to his brother, the T-shaped visor of his head armor turning to face the young Kage. We have to go. We've saved as many people as we can. Now we need to get out of here before we're all killed. The Kazekage did not even hesitate in his answer as a quick, firm, no escaped his lips. There are still civilians in the city. We can't save everyone. Kankuro yelled, moving to grab his brother before looking to the side. Chuji, Sakura, Inoue. Gaara wrestled from Kankuro's grip, blocking an incoming kunai before he launched a sand spear at his attacker, K him before he raised himself to his full height. Kankuro's words long silenced. Get the women and children out. Get 'em out. Gaara yelled at the top of his lungs at the ninja fighting in the street. His voice was as loud as a thunderbolt ringing clear through the ears of all who heard it, spurring them on to fight. Reminding them of just what was at stake other than their lives. Several hundred feet away a single, spinning Sharinganai stared at the red-head Kazekage as he rallied the men at his side. Troublesome guy that. Sabaku no Gaara, Jinchuriki of the Ichibi no Shukaku. Has extensive control over sand. Defense near impenetrable. Offensive capabilities, slightly above average. Kimimaro recited his intelligence on the cage. At the side of the copy nin and bone wielder were Jirabu and Tayuya. Saken, Akon and Kidomaru were busy assaulting the cage tower. Shouldn't be too much of a problem for you three to deal with. The copy ninja stated. You're not coming? Tayuya questioned. No. Kakashi said, waving her off as his eye traveled towards the Nina fighting in the tower. I have a date with a certain dragon, which I would just hate to miss. The three nodded before they leapt from the edge of the building, making their way toward the battlefield. Kakashi ignored their absence as his eye continued to scan the battlefield. Come out wherever you are. He sang to himself. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.